Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be taking you on a journey through the rich and diverse food culture of South Africa. Now, when we think about South African cuisine, we often imagine a blend of flavors, spices, and cooking techniques. What makes this food culture truly unique is a contribution of multiple ethnic groups and bringing its own history, traditions, and ingredients to the table. In this presentation, I'll be focusing on how four key groups, the indigenous Africans, the Afrikaans, the Cape Malay community, and the Indian community, have shaped South Africa's food heritage into what it is today. To start, let's take a look at South Africa itself. Here's a map of the country in the bottom left. There's three large cities: Johannesburg, the capital, Cape Town, Durban, and then Pretoria is another big city. This is a photo of Johannesburg on the right. And it's a pretty complex country, a lot of colonization, migration, and cultural exchange. These factors have influenced the country's food in many ways, creating a fusion of traditional and introduced elements. Throughout this presentation, I'll break down how each group has contributed its own unique flavors, cooking methods, and traditions to the vibrant food scene in South Africa. First off is the indigenous groups, such as the Koshan, Zulu, and Xhosa peoples. For centuries, these communities relied on what was available from the land, the wild game, the native plants, grains. The introduction of cattle, sheep, and goats was a huge influence on their diet, making meat central to many traditional meals. A really popular dish is the one you see in the bottom left with the corn and beans. It's called kusho. Another iconic food is the biltong in the middle, which is kind of their version of a beef jerky. And my roommate, the South African, has his own biltong machine, and I've had this, and it's absolutely excellent. It's a dried cured meat that's a staple even today. And on the far right, you'll see the indigenous African cooking style of often cooking over slow roasting meat over open flames. And this method of cooking eventually evolved into what we know as a braai or a South African barbecue. These traditional methods and dishes remain an important part of South Africa's cuisine, reflecting the close relationship between the people and their land. Next is the Afrikaans, which are the settlers from Dutch, Germany, and France. They first arrived in around the 1600s, and with them they brought their European farming practices. They introduced new crops and livestock to South Africa. The Afrikaners also brought a range of European culinary traditions, many of which were adapted to local ingredients and conditions. One of the best known Afrikaner contributions is a boerewors, which is a spice sausage that you see in the bottom left. It's typically cooked on a braai or an African barbecue and served in large gatherings. And in the middle you see the dish called a bobotie, which is a minced meat dish flavored with mild curry spices and topped with an egg custard. The dish perfectly shows how the Afrikaners adopted the local flavors like curry into their European style cooking, which is another example of the blend of different ethnic groups. And on the far right is a dessert dish called melktert or milk tart, which is it's kind of like flan, and it's a staple dessert dish. They have a national holiday called Heritage Day, which is kind of like the American version of 4th of July, and it is often celebrated with a braai, and it reflects the African tradition of outdoor cooking. And the food influence The Afrikaners' influence on food culture goes just beyond the dishes themselves. Afrikaners are largely credited with popularizing the braai culture, which has become a national pastime. Also known on Heritage Day, also known as Braai Day, people from all backgrounds come together to grill meat, which really highlights how their traditions have become part of the larger South African identity. Next are the Cape Malays, which are the enslaved people brought from mostly Southeast Asia. They're known for their fragrant spices, and their story really begins with the Dutch East India Company, which brought slaves from Indonesia, Malaysia, and other parts of Southeast Asia to the Cape in the 1600s. With them came a new world of spices, which involved coriander, cumin, cinnamon, and chilies, which blended with local and European ingredients to create the Cape Malay cuisine. One of the signature dishes is the dish you see on the bottom left, which is a slow cooked lamb stew with tamarind that balances sweet and sour flavors. Another favorite is sausages, which is the middle picture, which is a marinated skewered meat similar to a kebab. It's a popular choice for the braai. And for those of you with sweet teeth, the Cape Malay community is known for its koeksters, which is a sweet, sticky, deep-fried pastry, which has become a beloved dessert throughout the country, which is what you see on the bottom right. The Cape Malay influence is particularly visible in the use of spices and marinades, and their fusion of sweet and savory flavors has become a hallmark of South African cuisine. Lastly is the Indian community. Um, Durban, which is one of the major cities in South Africa, is one of the largest Indian communities outside of India, with around 800,000 to 1 million Indian people living in Durban alone. The Indians were originally brought to South Africa in the 19th century as indentured laborers to work on sugar plantations, particularly in the KwaZulu-Natal region. Over time, they made a significant mark on local food culture, especially with their use of spices. Indian cuisine in South Africa is best known for its flavorful curries and street foods. One of the most iconic dishes is the bunny chow, which is what you see in the bottom left. It's kind of a curry dish filled out or put into a hollowed out bread loaf. It originated in Durban, which has, like I said, which has one of the largest Indian communities outside of India. A couple other popular dishes are samosas, which is what you see on the bottom right. It's kind of a fried bread filled with meat and other vegetables. And in the middle is what you call rotis, which is a lentil-based dish. The overall Indian community impact on South African cuisine is massive, particularly in the use of cumin, coriander, and turmeric, which are now widely used across all communities. Indian food has become so embedded in South Africa's food culture that it's hard to imagine the country's culinary landscape without it. I think that is where the food culture kind of relates to California and the Bay Area specifically because we have a large Indian community, and I'm sure most of us or all of us love Indian food, and it's hard to imagine not having it and not having that blend of all the different cultures, especially in the Bay Area. And South Africa is a lot like that. I think it's a great trait for a country to have to be able to eat so many different types of food in so many different ways. These are my sources, and to kind of wrap it all up, the food culture of South Africa is a reflection of its diverse population. Indigenous Africans gave us a deep connection to the land and traditional cooking techniques. The Afrikaners brought their European heritage but adapted it with local ingredients and flavors, helping shape the modern braai culture. The Cape Malay community introduced an exciting mix of spices and cooking techniques, which has become a major part of South African food. And the Indian community brought their vibrant spices and street foods, adding another layer to the country's rich food heritage. Each group has kind of contributed something unique, but together they've created a culinary culture that is one of the most diverse and interesting in the world. and I hope to visit and try it all out one day. Thank you for listening.